Hi, thanks for joining in. My name is Ocean. I am an uninvited trespasser living on lands stolen from the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. This land theft is not only historical, but ongoing, and we are all beneficiaries of this genocide. My responses to this, in addition to activism and advocacy, have been to actively decolonize, to reestablish relations with my ancestral lineages, basically to relearn where I came from. And third, to regenerate my kinship with the land. In deepening this relationship to the land, I acknowledge the original caretakers of that land, without whom we would never be able to experience this bountiful biosphere. The Sook Hills includes territory from a number of local First Nations. The Sook, of course, the Malahat, the Chianu, the Pachidat, the Saanich, and the Cowichan tribes. For those of you who have experienced the Sook Hills, if you were to describe them to someone who had never heard of them before, what would you say? This amazing forest spans from Goldstream Park in the east to Port Renfrew in the west, and arguably beyond. It's an area of over 1,000 square kilometers. These wondrous hills include the traditional territories of the local nations, as has been mentioned. It also includes parks, such as the Sook Hills Wilderness Regional Park, the Sea-to-Sea Regional Park, Sook Mountain Provincial Park, the Sook Potholes, the water-protected areas, even the grounds of Camp Barnard and Camp Thunderbird. These hills also contain the so-called private managed forests of Mosaic, otherwise known as Timber West, and the Kapoor Lumber Company. There's also quite a lot of what's dubiously known as Crown Land. I just can't ever bring myself to calling this vast forest a tree farm. Forests are not tree farms. This is an enchanted forest, teeming with life. Very recently, up in those hills, I encountered this fantastic winged creature, a golden eagle. 2 kilometers later, I encountered the first wolf I have ever seen in the wild. And I have this photo of the paw prints to prove it. This is truly holy land. We often speak of holy lands in far off places, Mecca, Vatican, Jerusalem. But we have holy lands here. And arguably all land is holy. Because what makes something holy? That which generates life, that which nurtures life, that which sustains it. And that's what we have here in our own backyard. If you were not born here, what attracted you to the island in the first place? Where I come from, the land has been completely decimated by industrial resource extraction. And so when I arrived here for the first time, I realized straight off the bat, this is truly paradise. This paradise, like so many worldwide and throughout the centuries of colonization, remains under threat. We have known about these threats for years, decades, at least since the 90s, the last time we really had to stand up for this forest. It seems that the central question for so long now has been what to do with these, quote, rural resource lands, or the Juan de Fuca forest, as it's been referred to in the past. All of these threats are connected. Many of them involve the same players. And over the years, they continue to flare up. The latest flare-up started in January of last year when BC NDP plans were leaked to the public, plans that involved building an alternate route to the Malahat. Citing increased driver frustration with long traffic snarl-ups due to crashes without actually providing any data to support their claims. They wanted to build a route parallel to the highway to facilitate opening it up in the midst of a crash to get people home faster. What may have sounded like a great idea to many people, news of these plans set off alarm bells for many others. The most desirous route for them would have taken it right through the heart of a newly opened regional park, the Souk Hills Wilderness Regional Park. This route, to be used only in emergency purposes, would have followed a decommissioned logging road, Niagara, Maine. The trouble is that this trail has been incorporated into the Great Trail network that spans the entire continent. The roadway plans threatened stunning groves of old-growth giants. It threatened critical habitats and wildlife corridors. For some, the roadway plans were simply too good to be true. A potential future traffic corridor linking South Shawnigan Lake with the housing projects of the West Hills. In coming to terms with this news, we left despair behind and quickly held our first organizing meetings, drafted a petition, filed Freedom of Information requests, wrote op-eds in the newspapers, emails encouraging people to attend CRD meetings, pressured politicians, spoke with Ministry of Transportation officials, made videos. We even started a Friends of the Souk Hills Wilderness Facebook page. The group, with almost 900 members, has become a central hub for those passionate about what is going on in the local forest. A Freedom of Information request revealed the proposed routes for this alternate road to the Malahat. We were shocked to find out that it wasn't just one route they were considering, but other routes that would take this road deep into the Souk Hills, far deeper than anyone had expected or wanted. local politicians at the CRD level, including the Water Committee, the Regional Parks Committee, and the CRD Board of Directors. All passed motions opposing any highway infrastructure through the water supply areas. Strictly, their motions made no mention of areas surrounding the water supply area, sensitive forested areas, wilderness areas. And so we waited for a response from the provincial government, some acknowledgement that the will of the people at the regional level would put a stop to these plans. Instead, in our conversations with Ministry of Transportation officials, it was made very clear that these plans were continuing in spite of that opposition, and that a report was being commissioned, undertaken by a global engineering firm, Parsons, to look at the impacts and the benefits and blah, blah, blah of highway infrastructure through wilderness areas. We grew very impatient, and so with the help of our friends from the Extinction Rebellion, we staged a people's picket and rally out in front of a fundraiser, a dinner for the federal politician Randall Garrison, NDP, who had invited Horgan to speak that evening as the guest of honor. And so we felt it was necessary to show up, to make some noise, and to have a face-to-face with this man responsible for perpetuating his pet project and his sweetheart handout to real estate speculators and so-called developers. As is always the case with this man, he is terrified of coming face to face with any organized local grassroots opposition. The summer dragged into the fall, and they held their cards close to their chest, saying nothing. And then, in December, to everyone's surprise, the BC NDP announced they would not be proceeding with the alternate highway plans. To their credit, they undertook some due diligence, commissioned this engineering company to prepare this report. They backed down. Threats to at-risk species, protected areas, designated sensitive habitats, aquatic habitats, even archaeological and historical sites. There were socio-community reasons, property impacts, community disruption, water resource impacts. There were engineering reasons. And of course, there was the question about how much it would all cost. This in-depth report and the ultimate determination stemming from it now act as a benchmark for future deliberations down the line when the next incursion into this wilderness area is even entertained. This victory at the local level of people standing up, united, saying enough, is a reason to celebrate. And we have all of you to thank for that. However, maintaining vigilance is critical. And so we've shifted our focus onto particular areas of concern. From Mosaic's desecration of the peak of the Malahat, otherwise known as Yas, in the east, to the flagging tape snaked around the trunks of old-growth giants in Eden and Avatar groves. We won't be highlighting each of these areas of concern. However, mention should be made of some of these areas that are particularly worrisome to us. The first involves new road building having taken place within the last year or so in and around Boneyard Lake and Boneyard Mountain. This is on the western side of the Souk River, right across from the Souk potholes, a magical place that many of us love deeply. This roadwork has taken place on the side of the hill that you would see if you were standing on the eastern bank of the Souk River looking westward. The road snakes its way to the top of the hill and then suddenly ends for no discernible reason. No massive harvesting has taken place yet. It seems just the road building crew leaving behind so much that could have been salvaged, instead just roll down these hills, off the road, abandoned. So it's an area that we will continue to monitor given its proximity to regional parks, given its proximity to Sun River Estates, and the wave of residential construction taking place just a few kilometers away. Another area of concern is the forest mismanaged by the Kapoor Lumber Company immediately south of Souk Lake, where we get our drinking water. As you can see from this aerial photo, there is extensive logging taking place within a 30 square kilometer range, logging extremely close to bodies of water and watercourses, including Old Wolf Creek, which dumps into the Souk River, a critical wild salmon habitat. We're also monitoring operations in and around West Jordan, Maine, which was one of the proposed routes for the alternate highway to the Malahat. This area is of particular concern to us because it borders with the Leach water supply area. We are concerned this logging road may soon be rebranded as a traffic corridor from Shawnigan Lake to Otter Point. You can see from this photo the quality of the lumber that is being extracted is extremely low. These are immature, third growth, really just a couple of decades old. And so we wonder, is this still really just about harvesting lumber? Or is it now clearing land for future residential construction? And so keep in mind, basically, these areas I've just discussed are all within a few kilometers of our water supply. Yet, what makes this forest so enchanting is that it has not yet fallen under the hammer of real estate speculators and construction companies. Not yet. On the fringes, yes, here and there, but not punctured deep into the forest. So, what started out as a campaign to save a sliver of forest has ballooned into a local forest defender movement, something we have been lacking here in this area for quite some time. Now, this is completely different from the mandates of many ENGOs, whose work takes them elsewhere, all over the island, up and down the coast. But this is something different, hyper-localized, in the backyard. In the past year, we've learned so much and discovered what truly needs care and attention and compassion in our region. This single, massive, magical forest that could someday be the envy of other nations. Old forests with so much life and so much magic in them. So much opportunity for old growth. So, we are moving from fear-based reactionary responses of protecting or conserving to love-based notions. We feel the way forward is regrowth, restoration, rewilding, renewal, resilience, resurgence, regeneration. We want to continue to uphold, honor, and celebrate sacred places such as the Souk River, the Coxsila River, Old Wolf Creek, Boulder Lake, Bluff Mountain, Bear Creek Reservoir, the Upper Jordan River, Boneyard Lake, Jack Mountain. What is missing here in our dialogue with this landscape is the cultural history and awareness of what would have taken place on these lands throughout the centuries. So much has been lost, but stories remain. I understand that Mount Jack was named after a Sook elder. A few years back, some women from the Cowichan tribes approached the CRD requesting access to commemorate a legendary ancient migration of women from Sook, who would go on to become matriarchs of the Cowichan. They wanted to retrace the steps of their ancestors through the water-protected areas. In their submission to the CRD, they shared the story discussing how the first men of the Cowichan fell from the sky, and how the female ancestors of the Cowichan people walked from Sook to find their heaven-born husbands. They go on to mention that upon arriving, the women find the houses of the first men and see that they have carved wives out of wood for companions. The women then complete tasks that the men had left for the wooden wives, and after eventually throwing the wooden wives into the fire, convincing the men to take them on as wives. The children of this union became the Cowichan people. We all need to relearn stories like these. We need to relearn the original names of hilltops, rivers, lakes. I feel the time has come for a cultural center for the Sook Nation. Oh, and speaking of names, why is there still a lake within CRD water protected areas named after the white supremacist? Shameful. What do you see in this photo? If you're someone from the local nation, you may have responded that you see the faces of your ancestors. We still have so much left to learn. What do you see in this photo? I see the potential for a restorative forest economy. I see many jobs created removing the windfall and the brush, invasive species removal, habitat restoration, planting of native species, permaculture opportunities, food forests, foraging non-timber resources. Let's reinvest in this forest for the future. Let's grow a restorative forest economy. As an aside, we also need to reassess our relationship with wood, our insatiable demand for it. We also need to consider who we really need to supply with wood. The entire province? The entire country? The entire world? Time is running out as global climate catastrophes occur with greater frequency and severity. We worry that as the logging industry on the island collapses in free fall, that the land will be sold off in a free-for-all. Some have said, no, these lands will never be sold off. It's okay, don't worry about it. You're overreacting. But if that sounds outlandish, and we are totally off base, then let's have a guarantee from the company and from the province that these so-called rural resource lands won't end up in the hands of the land sharks. Because when a logging company generates more income from selling off land close to suburbs, and it has its own real estate division, this is cause for concern. This map really brings home what we're talking about and communicates clearly the sheer scale of the problem. As you can see from the map, fully 1/4 of the landmass of the CRD is so-called Crown land, represented by the light orange to the west. Another full quarter of the landmass of the region is so-called private managed forest, represented by the dark orange. You can make out the so-called Kapoor lands to the east of the Souk River, and pretty much the rest of that dark orange area is under Mosaic Timber West. In the case of the Souk Hills, how did a company like Mosaic end up with hundreds of square kilometers of forest? Again, over 1/4 of the total land area in the Capital Regional District. It's important to question the legitimacy of the origin of this company and its land holdings. How did this land exactly change hands and end up this way? We don't have the time here in this presentation to delve deeply into this history, but many of you are aware of what's known as the Great Land Grab, the E&N Land Grab. What is less well understood is how this forest came into the hands of Mosaic after it had been transferred from the rail company. Who authorized this handover from one to another? Was this undertaken in good faith? Is it legitimate? Is it legal? This seems like a good project for those with extraordinary research skills and experience with title searches. Guess who owns Mosaic? No, not Rich Coleman. But if you are a retired public servant, well, congratulations. I would be interested in speaking to you about divestment strategies. As it states from this article in the Tyee from 2019, Timber West was eventually sold to two funds that manage pension money for public sector employees. One was the BC Investment Management Corp, a provincial government agency. The other buyer was the Public Sector Pension Investment Board, which manages pension money for members of the Federal Public Service, the RCMP, and the Canadian Armed Forces. So basically, if you were a provincial or federal employee, you are a proud owner of the company that is primarily responsible for the devastation of the Sioux Hills. So, how much profit do they make? Good question. I don't know. I have no idea. But I guarantee you there would be far more wealth generated from a local forest economy transformed into something sane and sustainable, a regenerative forest economy, an entire industry devoted to restoring the forest, to reinvesting in it. Which brings us down to the simple question: in this day and age, should a private logging company actually own the land it's logging? Because there is very little regulatory oversight or management. The provincial government is apparently working out new legislation to oversee logging on private managed forest land. In the meantime, we have the Private Managed Forest Association. When you call them up with a suspected violation, something that seems so egregious to you, they'll say the company's following the rules, and your complaint ends up falling into some black hole. But from these photos, you can see quite plainly that something is wrong. They are simply logging way too close to watercourses. The boundary should be at least 500 meters instead of the paltry 10 meters currently found in the regulations. There's this legal principle in criminal law. In determining whether something is criminal or not, judges have relied on this concept of whether the act would offend the sensibilities of a reasonable person. With respect to environmental and climate crimes, I would use the very simple standard and ask, would this offend the conscience of a child who would be forced to witness this? After all, it is the legacy that we will leave to them. I would also like to touch briefly upon the effects of road building through wilderness areas. As you can see from this photo, there is this very real concern now that we have that old decommissioned logging roads are now becoming streams and creeks as the water follows the path of least resistance. This has an irrevocable impact on the landscape and changes the forest forever. Widespread networks of roadways through wilderness areas also create wind tunnels and destroy natural windbreaks for larger trees that end up toppling down, driven down by gusts and gravity in far greater frequency than we would see in a forest that is completely intact. Currently, Mosaic has temporarily ceased operations, citing market conditions, and this has thrown many people out of work and has once again led to a very precarious job situation. The company is quite simply on the ropes. Now is the time to cut the head off this hydra. One of two things are going to ultimately happen here for them to stay afloat. They'll either lean on the government for more handouts and sweetheart deals to continue logging toothpicks, or they will find some slippery way to sell off these lands, as Western Forest Products did some years back, where they were able to suddenly remove lands from the tree farm license system and parcel them out as real estate lots. The way they are desperately logging and their shoddy efforts at replanting leads to significant fire hazards, and it threatens our water supply with airborne pathogens from the smoke. With the wildfires raging globally in the midst of climate chaos events, we absolutely need enhanced fire protection measures. We really need a world-class wildfire response system for the region's forest. Does this look like world-class to you? A single fire truck from another century, abandoned in the summer heat. The CRD's wildfire response is quite sophisticated, on the other hand. Fire weather stations, lookouts, muster points, air surveillance by the Victoria Flying Club, strict protocols around any work undertaken during wildfire season. Now, what's the point of having all of this if right next door they're operating like amateurs? In some respects, the CRD is on the right track with a lot of this. One really amazing and interesting way to experience the Souk Hills is to take the CRD Get to Know Your H2O tour. This free public tour takes place in the summer months. You get to ride a bouncy school bus around the shores of Souk Lake, with several stops along the way, including a stretch through the forest mismanaged by Kapoor Lumber Company. One takeaway for me from that tour was how seriously the CRD takes the protection of our water supply, and how shameful it would be if all of that were to go up in smoke. The CRD's Land Acquisition Fund has gone a long way over the years to securing forests that would have otherwise succumbed to residential construction projects. The proceeds from a $20 per household levy goes towards purchasing land with the intention of eventually turning it into parkland. And though this initiative is problematic in some ways and far from perfect, at the very least, it's preserving critical wilderness habitats. The CRD also declared a climate emergency last year. This should not stand as some empty declaration. So, if we demand that they seriously live up to this obligation, one of the best ways, in my opinion, to do so would be to say straight out, no more industrial scale logging in the CRD. Do we really need slash piles 2 stories high like this burning in the autumn? Do we really need the region's hillsides devastated and dried out like this? The sheer scale of this activity is simply madness. We have a petition online that I encourage you to sign at islandvoice.ca, and it's a moratorium. And we are demanding that the local and provincial government work together to impose an immediate moratorium on widespread industrial logging within the region, with the aim of transitioning these lands out of tree plantation models and transforming this forest into the basis for a sustainable, regenerative forest economy, employing thousands possibly, while creating space for a critical wildlife refuge and ensuring a thriving ecosystem that we can pass on to future generations. This cooling off period is absolutely essential until we as a region can sort all of this out and determine a sustainable and sane course of action for these forests. So, what would come next for the Silk Hills? Some folks have advocated for community forest models, but what we're envisioning goes beyond the standard model and the use of this term by the Ministry of Forests. There is a community forest association for the province, and you can visit their website. For them, a community forest means giving exclusive rights to harvest timber on Crown land. So this is not what we're talking about, really. We're more interested in community, not corporate control of the forest, where logging becomes less of a priority far down the list and is done, if at all, in a hyper-sustainable manner. We are looking to democratize land use decisions. The Forest Advisory Committee in the Cowichan region has just been established and appears promising, so we'll keep our eyes on that. The regional forest boards that are mentioned in this policy paper, The Future of Forests and Communities on Vancouver Island, would be an idea worth considering. This paper policy statement was authored by Ben Isett and Ray Travers, and I encourage people to have a look at it and gain some understanding of what could possibly take place here on the island. One way or the other, there's options. It's time for us simply to come together as a community to determine what is a sustainable land use for this forest that's given us so much already, that's provided so much. We just simply can no longer surrender to moneyed interests without any pushback. And from a much wider perspective, we must return to the idea of land justice. And if we are serious about decolonization, it demands of us that we give control of the land back to the local nation. We are seeing the slogan, land back, arise out of these conversations, included on banners and protest signs. And it's actually a very simple declaration. Land back. It cannot possibly get any more straightforward than that. The UN Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service recognizes the importance of land back and recognizes that it actually helps to mitigate the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity. In the report, it reads, governance, including customary institutions and management systems and co-management regimes that involve Indigenous peoples and local communities, can be an effective way to safeguard nature and its contributions to people by incorporating locally attuned management systems and Indigenous and local knowledge. In this regard, I also encourage you to read the paper entitled Land Back from the Yellowhead Institute, authored by Sherry Pasternak and Hayden King, two names you may recognize from Idle No More. A primary focus of the paper is how can Indigenous people reassert jurisdiction to lands and waters outside of the reserve boundaries. My favorite subheading from the paper is, what is Crown land, quote unquote, and how can Indigenous peoples get it back? Now, does land back mean you're going to lose your house and your private property? Not exactly. We speak of economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, racial justice, but we very seldom speak of land justice. And so this is what we're talking about when we discuss land back. Where we can, we should. And this could take the form of an Indigenous land trust. I've been told $30 to $60 million could cover it here within the region. The Yellowhead Institute is also working on another paper called Cashback. I'm really looking forward to reading that paper. And it seems so screwed up and ironic that a nation would need to buy back land. But if this is the direction they choose, they should be empowered to do so. A more realistic option would be a tribal park, otherwise known as an Indigenous protected and conserved area. And for a decent primer on this concept and the lessons learned, you can consult this report put out by the David Suzuki Foundation. Another helpful report filled with recommendations is We Rise Together, published by the Indigenous Circle of Experts, of which Chief Gordon Planis is a member. And this report was written in response to Canada's international legal obligations under what is known as Canada Target 1, our international commitments to protecting biospheres, our commitment to conserving at least 17% of the land mass of the country by the end of 2020. This report looks at how we can achieve that through encouraging Indigenous protected and conserved areas. The report also discusses the three essential elements of an Indigenous protected and conserved area, and I think it's something that we need to keep in mind when these discussions start to take place within our region at a local level. And they would need to be Indigenous led. There would need to be a long-term commitment to conservation from both sides. And the elevation of Indigenous rights and responsibilities is paramount. In the region, as elsewhere, there are many challenges that colonization poses for shifting to an IPCA. There are the tensions between hereditary leadership and elected band leadership. Indian Act band politicians negotiating with all three levels of government, often behind closed doors. There is the systemic poverty, the fractured communities, the ongoing land dispossession. But ultimately, what it comes down to is who controls what happens on the land. Who should be at the table? Who is authorized to speak for the land, the rivers, the trees? The Suk used to hunt and forage on these lands. They used to fish in the lakes and build smokehouses. Now, either the CRD, the Crown or a company owns it and's kicked them off. We are witnessing ongoing land dispossession of the Suk. I've been told there are members of the nation who wish to still live off the land out there, but are prevented from doing so for a number of bullshit reasons. Who controls the land? Who has access to it? A Suk youth leader, Katie Raven George Jim, shared her vision with me. A very simple vision to get the kids of the nation back onto the land. Very few of them spend time in the Suk Hills, if at all. We all need to ensure and promote access for the youth and for future generations into these forests. My favorite Facebook group at the moment is Vancouver Island Gate Closures. And this is one group who is really pissed off about access to the Suk Hills. There are over 4,000 members in this group. And their discussions are actually starting to focus on taking legal action to ensure access to lakes and to the backcountry. And so it's starting to get real juicy. But it also shows how pissed off people are that places where they used to go as a child with their parents or grandparents, swimming, fishing, hiking, is now gated off, restricted to them. Does this sound familiar to you? We need to encourage managed access. I do feel strongly about controlled access, primarily for one very good reason, because it's wilderness. And if something happens to you out there, it would make a lot more sense if we knew who was coming and going. But why are we fighting for a shortage of provincial park spaces? Could we not open up a few more wilderness camping spots operated and managed by the local nation? One excellent candidate for increased controlled access would be the Leech River. The Leech River originates high up in the hills and eventually meets up with the Suk River just south of Suk Lake. Many of you are familiar with the Leechtown site located at the confluence of these two rivers. You can see from this map, from the Regional Parks Strategic Plan, and from efforts of the Land Acquisition Fund, there is an attempt to try to build parks out that provide some form of connectivity. West Leech Main, an old logging road that runs along the south shore of the Leech River, could be transformed into a multi-use trail very easily, very quickly, closed to vehicular traffic with a simple, unobtrusive footbridge over the Suk River could facilitate access to hikers and cyclists straight off the Galloping Goose. The small clearings around Old Leechtown at the confluence of the rivers could also be repurposed into simple, rugged wilderness campsites, perhaps managed by the Suk Nation, as is the case downriver. This could provide visitors with an additional outstanding wilderness experience in our area, contributing to the local economy. This trail could be the beachhead that would eventually connect up to a whole series, a network of trails linking all of the Suk Hills. Multi-day hiking trails with simple rustic cottages along the way. This work has already been started out on the Kludak Trail out near Port Renfrew, and it can easily extend eastward if given the chance. Managed access could also come in the form of access agreements with groups such as the South Island Mountain Bike Society, the Souk Bike Club, even organizations such as the Habitat Acquisition Trust, involved in invasive species removal, could be provided with the opportunity to do this amazing work deeper into the Souk Hills. One way to generate interest, commitment, and capital to land back is an ecosystem service fee. The premise behind this is quite simple. Those who benefit off the land should pay a surcharge to the original caretakers of the land, with funds to provide decent jobs as guardians and healers of the forest. Hotels, restaurants, fishing charters, bike shops, local community businesses rallying around this important cause. This whole tribal park idea is taking off out in Tofino. Why can't it happen here? Fun fact, do you know how much Tofino makes in a single year from ecotourism? 300 million. Anyone know how many people are employed in forestry living within the CRD? According to Stats Canada, less than 300. Less than 300 jobs or $300 million. The choice is clear. However, no worker needs to be left behind. A restorative forest economy would create so many jobs. Just off the top of my head, I can think of wilderness guides, wilderness first aid personnel, search and rescue, waste wood harvesters, wood artisans, tree planters, invasive plant removers, firefighters, forest guardians, environmental scientists. The choice seems so obvious. So why aren't we moving in this direction? What can we do? Well, we can begin by pushing back, and our victory in December shows that this is possible. When concerned citizens stand together, sometimes they can move mountains. It's also important to get out there on the land, to get involved with the land. We need more eyes out there. We also need you to poke your local politicians, get in their faces, discuss all of this, educate them on what's going on out there. We also need you to be vigilant about any regional zoning changes around those areas of concern that were previously highlighted. Let's really start to explore the possibility of an Indigenous protected and conserved area for the Souk Hills. The CRD can play a role in this. However, this co-management with regional government must accommodate protocols and build consensus through free, prior, and informed consent. In this country, we have a dark history around land theft and dispossession for the sake of protected parks. The CRD has a lot to learn still in this regard, but we're seeing good cooperation on a number of fronts, including the Spring Salmon Place campground on the Souk River managed by the Souk Nation. We can achieve this. An IPCA co-managed but Indigenous governed at its root. Souk Council could also be taking a leadership role in this, and so I encourage you, Souk residents, to reach out to your local representatives and start to discuss the possibility of this. It is time to grow this local forest defender movement. We can do this. We got this. And finally, this is my son, River. in utero, unborn, about to be unleashed upon the world. And so, as a first-time father, I am realizing that we are not doing this for ourselves. We are doing this for our children, for our great-grandchildren, for future generations. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to stand up and to fight back. If not now, then when? May the forest be with you. Long live the Sook Hills.